In his essays, he will cover several topics in one essay, so he doesn't always give a title for his essays. But I've gone through to give you, here are some of the subjects that he has in his political essays. Present laws are outdated. Collecting debts and laws regarding debts. Tariffs. Laws are too complicated and there's too many of them. People's attempt at freedom and their failure. The power of the elite over the masses. Two classes of professions, the useful and the non-useful. And he said the latter were lawyers, doctors, and priests. It's interesting how timely some of the things he says in these political essays are today. And I really think they could appear on the editorial page of our newspapers. We're currently involved in a debate over guns. One side is arguing that the Constitution gives us the right to bear guns. And the other side is arguing that over 200 years ago, the framers of the Constitutions could not have anticipated rapid-fire assault weapons. McClure weighs in on what he thinks of the Constitution. It may be doubted whether a Constitution adapted to a population of 3 million would suit a population of 12 million any better than a steam engine for a boat of 100 tons would answer the purpose of propelling a boat of 1,000 tons. And he says that when the Constitution is only about 40 years old. We're presently concerned over PACs and the influence of industry on our elected officials. Well, McClure refers to patronage as a growing evil. And 185 years ago, he warned us about this. It would therefore appear prudent and necessary for the citizens of the Union to follow the old adage, a stitch in time saves 9, and immediately begin to reform a growing evil and not defer that evil until it accumulates force sufficient to resist all the combination and energy of the honest, independent part of the Union. It's too late. He also weighs in on another topic that we discussed today, and that's term limits for our elected officials. The monopolizing of power by permitting the same individual to be reelected as often as he can purloin a sufficiency of patronage to pay for his reinstatement is approaching as near hereditary power as the knowledge of the day will tolerate. And just on laws and lawyers, he observes, there are loopholes enough in all our laws for rogues to creep out of by the assistance of cunning lawyers. You can see how some of his ideas, he forms these during his geological days. And in his Geology Journal, you can see he does not like custom houses. So here's something from his Geology Journal. We spent the whole day in endeavoring to get a custom house officer to be present at the packing of a case of rocks, without which we could not leave this place. It was of no purpose, and we must go to the courthouse and pack the custom house and pack them in the presence of all the great dignitaries. 4 days have been lost by the stupidity of their regulations. Barcelona, February 1808. 20 years later, in 1828, he hasn't calmed down. And he writes, every time I returned from abroad, I lost a day and a dollar in going through the ceremony of the custom house. And after all the declarations and oath they made me take, the officer, in turning out my half-dozen dirty shirts, seemed to accuse me of being a defrauder of the public, a smuggler, a perjured thief who had declared to a lie. The sensation is so extremely unpleasant to me that I would sacrifice half a year's expenses any time to be relieved of it. And he finally just boils it down by saying, custom houses in all countries afford a perpetual temptation to perpetuate all kinds of criminal deception, fraud, and perjury. Amen. I mean, this is why I said he was seen as a radical to the establishment, because he is blasting everything that is sacred. We can then return to let's look at his educational Like the political ones, he doesn't always give them a title because he covers a number of topics. And so I went through and made a list of some of the topics that he discusses in his essays. On teaching literature, problems with the educational system. Gee, I wonder if that could be applied today. On educating the masses and the opposition by those in power. On the self-interest of teachers. On teaching positive knowledge. On the incorrect way subjects are taught. The destructive nature of following Britain's educational system. On educating women and children. Why free schools are scarce. And the importance of libraries. I've mentioned the Pestalozzi Schools, and I'm sure that a scholar on Pestalozzi Schools could spend more time than I am this evening discussing it. See if I can boil it down. McClure wanted practical, useful knowledge that he could use and apply. The Pestalozzi school system offered this because, in the simplest terms, it seemed to be education by doing, or at least a good part of that education was learning by doing something. I don't know if this is a good analogy. I don't think it was a vocational school, but it would be like an auto mechanics class where you learn about a car by taking it apart and reassembling it, as opposed to just reading about how to do that in a textbook. He mentions, and I'll go ahead and mention some more things about that later on. So here are some of his quotes, and I have a number of them. On the education of children, this is what McClure says. Children, as well as other animals, commence their instruction the moment they begin to make use of their senses. The individuals who surround them in this early stage of development of their facilities become their first and most radical instructors. The instruction of the rising generation is the only possible means of a radical cure for the miseries, misfortunes, and unhappiness of mankind. He sees a certain amount of child development in this, although that term is never used. Nothing but positive knowledge ought to be taught to children, the properties of matters, of motion, truths that don't change with the caprice of fashion or opinion. Storing the minds of youth with positive knowledge impressed upon them by the evidence of their senses will furnish them with the stock of useful information not liable to change or deceive them. He makes the following comment about educating women. The improvement of mankind has lost the assistance of half the population by the education of women being confined to their physical accomplishments and their mental faculties so much neglected. Now here's a real McClure. Here's where he's tearing into the old system. He refers to this traditional British classical education as the old system. One of the most injurious effects of the old artificial of education, as I call it, to distinguish it from the Pestalozzian model, is the imprisoning of children for 4 or 5 hours a day to a task of irksome and disgusting study with nothing but fear of punishment could force them to perform. After which they're let loose on society for 8 hours, full of revenge and retaliation against their jailers, exerting all their ingenuity to do mischief indiscriminately to all older than themselves, for considering them all accessories to their persecution and confinement. That's true. That is true McClure. I think that teachers in McClure's day, they're often referred to as professors. Even my father, educated in a one-room schoolhouse on the prairies of Kansas, referred to his teachers as they were professors. And they were, quite distinguished, and they had a good reputation. Well, McClure likes none of this. Of all animals, man, or what is called the higher or better orders, is the only class that does not attend to the instruction of their offspring themselves, but leaves that essential duty to hirelings. For everyday experience proves that bad instructors of their own children are even those who are capable of instructing the children of others. And then here's one of his kind of developmental things. You can see this in here. And he's speaking about literature. To begin with literature in the educational process before the mind has acquired ideas is like attempting to polish a sponge. Well, I'd like to bring McClure into the 20th century. I hadn't considered this when I started, but after reading McClure, it got me to thinking about the way I had been taught in high school and the times that I had spent memorizing things that I've never used. And at the top of my list is an assignment we had in high school English to memorize the first 21 lines of Chaucer's prologue to the Canterbury Tales in Middle English. When thou'rt Aprila with the surest sota, the drouth of March has pierced to the rota and bothered every vein in Swiss liqueur, of which vertu and vendered is the clure. I have no idea what that means. We were never given the translation, and that's just the first 4 lines. I mean, I sometimes wish my mind were like my computer. I would delete this stuff. But as I recall, my impression after reading it was that Chaucer needed a speech therapist. And I'm not sure why our teacher thought this was important, but I didn't dare challenge it. McClure mentions this sort of thing. From the dogmatic assertions of learned professors preclude all reasoning and accustom their pupils to take for granted everything they hear without investigation. And I would not, as I said, I would not have challenged it. I remember when I taught in a liberal arts college, the faculty was considering new courses, and there was a proposed course came before us on Introduction to Accounting, and it was voted down unanimously on the grounds that it was vocational, useful. I always thought if only a course had come before it called Accounting Methods in Medieval England, it would have been passed like that. I know I get a little sarcastic here, but now what really amazed me in reading McClure, the same time I was reading a book by Elsie Clapp and how the two overlapped. Now, Elsie Clapp is not a household name in education. In fact, it sounds like someone that Al Capp would have one of his characters from Dogpatch. But Elsie Clapp was a student at Columbia University studying under John Dewey in the early 20th century. And John Dewey was proposing a new type of education called progressive education. Progressive education was not a Pestalozzian one, but it was in many ways. At least there was a massive overlap in progressive education in terms of learning by doing. And this is what really struck me. Elsie Clapp had an opportunity to go into a rural school in Kentucky to introduce progressive education, and Dewey encouraged her to do it. So she became the principal of the Rogers Clark Ballard School and introduced progressive education. In the 4th grade, students learned about pioneer life by making candles, growing gourds and converting them to dippers and spoons. They made dyes from various plants and then used them to dye materials. Students were learning chemistry and biology without knowing it. Because she had really distinguished herself by introducing progressive education in this school, Eleanor Roosevelt handpicked her to head up the school of the New Deal community of Arthurdale in West Virginia.